Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Jack Smart from Backstage. Before we are joined by our guests today, I want to let you all know that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit organization that relies entirely on donations to provide emergency assistance and free educational programs to SAG-AFTRA artists. This conversation is made possible thanks to the generosity of our supporters. Over the past year, the foundation has given nearly $7 million in COVID relief to more than 7,000 performers. If you are a SAG-AFTRA artist and need help, please ask. And if you can help, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Thank you for your support. And now, without further ado, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce actors Ann Dowd, Martha Plimpton, Jason Isaacs, Reed Birney, and writer-director Fran Kranz of the award-winning feature film Mass. Welcome. How are you all?
That's great.
Very well.
Fran is also an actor.
Yes, indeed. Oh, we're going to go there. We're going to get into it.
Okay.
Congratulations to you all on the success of this amazing film. This is one of the most powerful films of the year, one of the most powerful I've seen. Because this is an audience of your peers, I like to start by asking, how did each of you get your SAG card?
Oh.
And yes, Fran, you want to start? Fran, you want to start with you?
Yeah. Well, my first job was Frasier. I was a guest star on Frasier, but I think you had to get, multiple credits, right? I forget. But the second job was Donnie Darko. So it was one of those, I'm pretty sure. And maybe I paid my way in after Frasier. I'll have to go back and look. Yeah.
Reed, what about you?
I definitely bought my way in. I had gotten my equity card doing children's theater. There's a whole story there.
Sure.
But after 6 months, I don't know if you still can, you could buy your way in. Yeah. And I went, and I think it was something crazy, like $150. I think it's $150,000 now. But, it was nothing. And I got my AFTRA card. I went, one day, one-stop shopping, got the whole thing done. Fully vetted member of all the unions. Very proud.
And Anne, what about you?
I was hoping you would skip me. It is amazing.
She still doesn't have her card.
I don't. Don't tell them, Reed. It's all such a blur, to be perfectly honest. But I was very happy about it. Does that work, Jack? I was happy.
It's all a blur. It was the drugs, the drink, or just the decade?
It was just the fear of it all, or the excitement. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And Jason, what about you?
Well, I got weirdly, Reed, you never mentioned it. I got my equity card in England from entertaining at children's parties, doing magic and puppets and games and stuff.
That may be worse than children's theater.
Yeah, I did. And then I got my SAG card, I think, for doing a late night talk show to publicize, I want to say Dragonheart. And I got Taft-Hartley, is that what it's called? Means you don't pay for the first one. For doing it was such a late show. I think it was like 6 o'clock in the morning. Some talk show that only myself and my mother watched. And that was it, I think.
Oh.
Wow. I got mine I got my equity card first, like everyone else here, in 1980. And my SAG card.
At what age, Martha? How old were you?
I was 9.
9.
And, and then my SAG card I was Taft-Hartley for my first film job, which was just a couple of scenes in a movie called Rollover with Jane Fonda. And then the following year, when I made my first feature, I want to say it was The River Rat, where I got my SAG card, although it might also have been my, the Calvin Klein commercials that I did with Richard Avedon. But I think I was 11 or 12 when I got my SAG.
Wow.
You're a freak of nature.
Wait, are you saying you did underwear shots age 11?
Yeah.
Martha, do I need to go on the internet? Were you doing underwear shots age 11 and there are all those people in prison now?
No, Calvin Klein jeans, my friend. Jeans.
Okay, sorry.
But it was really cool because Richard Avedon shot them. And
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
You look great in a pair of jeans.
Like a whole series, like Sherry.
Are they on YouTube? Can we see them on YouTube?
Oh, God, settle down, Reed.
I'm just going to say no.
And that's all we've got time for. So
Yeah, really.
watch Mass.
Well, I was going to ask, yeah, Mass is a tragic story. And it's, for those who don't know, it's the story of the parents of a school shooter and the parents of one of that shooter's victims coming together to try to heal. And it is a heavy premise, but I wanted to ask, I mean, already based on this conversation, what's this about laughing and cracking jokes every time the cameras weren't rolling? Was this a concerted effort? Was this a policy of the tone of the set?
No, it was natural and not disrespectful to the material. We just, Reed happens to be absurdly funny, and so do the rest of the actors.
Not intentionally.
No, but we didn't. It just was I guess we could say it's a release, but we found each other very funny. And we always knew when it was time to drop back in, and no talk necessary about it. Just,
It was bliss.
I go further. I'm saying if you're feeling what we felt, which we didn't want to think about or talk about too much, it's a film of very, very strong emotions. And so if you're crying and shouting and feeling rage or pain or hope or forgiveness, whatever those things are, they're extreme. The laughter and tears are very close together. So we was vaguely on the edge of hysteria for a lot of the time. So we had a great time. We had a great time because those things are intimately connected.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And Fran, you've talked about how this process has been hard to shake. And of course, here we are. It's a years-long process, and here you are still talking about it. You've also said you had no idea what you were getting into. Could you tell us a little bit about what inspired this and how this all came about?
Yeah, I started reading about the subject matter just because I was curious. Doesn't sound like the right word. I wanted to know more. I was a new parent. I was overwhelmed by what was happening with the kind of frequency that was happening in our country, and I started reading. I mean, it was the evening of the Parkland shooting. I was on Amazon buying books, and I wanted to know everything I could about it. I had no movie or story in mind, but look, I've always loved, going back to when I learned about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. I've always been very inspired and moved by this notion that people can meet one another face to face, and just by talking and listening, work through their differences, and even, across the table from people they feel blame and hate towards, as was the case in the amnesty hearings in South Africa. And when I came across these meetings, as I saw the same thing. There was only a handful of these that I read about, and there were obviously not really details to be shared. They were so private and sensitive. But I knew that's what was happening. It's about people trying to find a path forward to a better place and a healing future. And it was inspiring, and that kind of sidelined me from what I was reading, and I became very focused, sort of urgently focused on trying to craft one of these conversations myself and dramatize it, and put it on film. And so yeah, it's been the most rewarding journey of my life, but it's also, it's been very, very emotional and tiring. But I get, opportunities like this that are very reinvigorating, and trying to push and promote this film and these four incredible people and what they did with it,
Absolutely. And those four incredible people, I want to ask you all about inspiration as well. But first, what do you remember about your reaction to this premise when you were getting involved? Like, what do you remember about the premise of Mass, and then versus what did it turn out to be, and how different was that?
You're going to tell us.
I feel like this is a good one for Reed.
Okay.
I don't know what to think about that.
You had read it before any of us, so it's
right. And it was in the brief window that it was a play is when I first got it. I would say, Jack, the curious thing thinking about this, because this is a question we haven't been asked. When I read it, I saw it perfectly in my mind. And I would say the film is pretty much exactly what I saw. Somehow or other, Fran was able to manifest perfectly what he had written.
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, yeah. I know this is for the actors, but I mean, it changes. They say that the film has 3 lives, and the writing, the shooting, and the editing, post, and it's very true. The thing certainly evolved, but in essence, it does feel like it became what it always wanted to be. Truthfully, and of course there were changes, and the cast was such a huge step in that evolution, and bringing them all together, finally having the real cast and having a rehearsal as short as it was, fine tuning the script, making sure everything was there that they needed to go where they needed to go. There was sort of a critical stage of the writing process that was really trying to collaborate with these 4 and change it give them the beats they needed, or get rid of the beats that were confusing. That was the key. But from that point, where the script was when we got into Idaho, it's pretty much what you have on screen.
The one thing I did picture when I read the script, both as the play and as the movie, was that the room would be enormous with a stage at one end, and that we were
what, honey?
It would be enormous with a stage at one end. One of those sort of multi-purpose rooms. And that our table would be this tiny little table in the middle of this vast room. That was my initial conjuring. So when I walked into the actual room, I did have a moment of like, oh, it's a little small. This room's a little small.
It was always hard watching people walk into the room. It made me really second guess myself. But I didn't want a church that looked like a concert hall. I didn't want any conveniences, right? I didn't want it to be pretty. I wanted it to be modest. I wanted it to look like it would be in any kind of small town in America, and in a church that, hard times. They don't have a large parish. Their main purpose is serving the community in other ways. Right. That was always really important to me.
It's so interesting to hear, I don't know if it's, anyway, when I read it, thank you, Fran, I did not have a sense of how it would play out at all. I don't have that particular ability. What I knew was that what had been written was the truth about all of them. My interest was, I kind of liked Linda right away. Wanted to know her for sure. And I figured the rest of it would be presented to us, and we would be together wherever we were. It could have been.
Did you have a meeting with Fran at all?
No meeting, no talking, no need. Nothing. From my perspective.
Until we showed up in rehearsal. That's the first time you met.
Yeah.
We had a phone call. I remember a phone call. No?
No, my darling, we did.
Maybe it was after.
I didn't want to talk to a living soul. I just wanted to get in the room with them, Yeah, I have. Anyway.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Sorry, Martha, were you going to speak?
Oh, no.
I thought a few things, actually. When I read it, I thought, on the one hand, this is a film about something, and it really works. I'm incredibly, moved, gripped by literally what's going to happen, which is the most basic thing that any story should have. Like, is it a page turner? How is this going to resolve itself? But also, it was a time when we shot him, and I read it, Donald Trump was president, and Brexit had happened in the UK, and it seemed to be a time of enormous division, enormous hatred, increasing polarization, and many people in the world that I hated, I was angry at, and I was trying to do a podcast at the time, trying to get someone to sponsor me to do a podcast, to go around and find people who had the most opposing points of views and see if they could find any neutral ground. It was inspired by actually stuff I did with the Red Cross, refugees. All the people I knew had opinions about refugees, but they never met any. And, they thought that everyone was coming to kind of bleed the country dry instead of fleeing terror and stuff. And so it seemed to be a film about forgiveness, the necessity of forgiveness, the power of forgiveness for the person who is carrying hatred and just poisoning themselves. So it was about something, but was it dramatic? Like, it was an issue. I knew what was going in, and I read it and I was completely gripped. Then there's the other level as an actor. You go, well, have I got something to play? And I saw, first of all, it through Jay's prism before I began to think about the other characters. And I thought, here's a man who is utterly who doesn't know himself at all. And he's going into this room to fix things outside himself, to fix his wife, to fix the law, to fix psychiatry, to fix schools, but there are forces in him. There are things he's been denying and not looking at that come out in this room. And as someone who's been married for a long time, I saw it as a film about marriage and communication, seeing each other as much as it is certainly about the things that happen in the past. It's about how do you live in the present? What's going on between your ears every day that's destroying your life that really you're doing to yourself? So those are the levels on which you work. And then as a person in the business, I thought, is this actually a film? Is anybody ever going to watch it? And that one I was clear about. It's going to be terrible. No one is ever going to watch this thing. It's going to be unwatchable. It's going to be 4 people in a room. But I don't give a fuck because what's the point of being an actor if you don't want to go and tell these stories like this about something so important and with such fabulously realized human beings on the screen? I don't care if no one sees it. So we went and had this extraordinary experience, the 5 of us and the crew as well, but particularly the 4 of us in the scene, the one scene. And to find out that it is having the same effect on audiences and moving them and inspiring them and giving them hope and a kind of spiritual experience like it did to us is amazing. And it just shows you, for those actors who are watching, follow your heart, follow the great writing, and let go of the results. Sometimes they'll surprise you.
What was your initial impression versus how it turned out? Like, were there any surprises for you?
Oh, there were so many surprises, but none of them having to do with, the script or anything. I think I was mostly just surprised by, how sort of, this is going to sound weird, but how strangely easy it turned out to be. I think, I think when, first of all, when I read it, I don't usually finish scripts in one reading. I find them very tedious to read, generally. But this one, I finished in one sitting. And, I just was taken, the momentum just pulled me along as I read. And then, I think, and Anna said this as well, like, there's the nervousness of, can you pull this off or can you do this? And as Jason said, I was surprised by how if we all did agree just to let go of everything else and let the script do the work. And I found that it really did that. The script really took care of all of it for me.
Yeah, it's true.
I had so little really trouble, because if I was in trouble, I'd just go back to the text, just go back to the script. So in that regard, I was surprised by, of course, when you're there and you're in the room and you're doing the scenes, of course, it's exhausting and it's emotional and all of that. But I was surprised by how easy, you know what I mean? How it just, you just let go and it takes you along.
The night before filming your big confession, your big scene, I remember being all of us in your room running lines with you, and you were flipping out about the lines. It was just like, how am I ever going to get these lines in my head? And then we showed up, and if I'm remembering correctly, that scene pretty much took the whole day to shoot. Mm-hmm. And Martha had to stay in this place of torture from sunup to sundown, and she did it all day long. It was unbelievable. Once she got on the set, she stayed in that place, and we did still laugh and we still did all our hijinks. Yeah. But Martha was able to stay in that place all day, and it just was right there. It was really something to see.
Well, I would say, Martha, you're right completely about the script doing it, but there's even more. This is supposedly a SAG conversation. It's not really about Fran's brilliance, but the brilliance of the script is not in the things that he said to me. It's that the world that is implied, all the history between us, all the history, all the things that have gone on in our marriage with us as parents, all the memories that you're suppressing, all the things you want to say but aren't saying, they're all written. They're just invisible. And we didn't have to look hard to find them. You could feel them buoying you up. That Fran had thought all those things through, and the dialogue sat on top of that.
There's
That's
some
what a great
wonderful
script
things
is.
in this script, aside from the beauty and the meticulousness and the sort of composition of it. But there's also just wonderful. It's terrifically skilled, I think, what Fran did. For example, Rita's mentioned before, these little details about other people, about Anthony that you learned, the kid who's helping Judy set up the room, the small little details about him that they're not telling his story per se. They're not giving you tons of information, but they're just these little bits of truth, a little bit of background or something, about him. It's wonderful. It's just wonderful. And I think things like that sort of also help to move the sort of momentum. They sort of help to build the momentum, the idea of a past, the idea of, people having different kinds of baggage or different kinds of history. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think
There you are.
One
We
of the
never looked
things
at the
that-
other actors. We never looked at each other and thought, I don't believe that because that's a piece of exposition. I
Right.
believed everything all three of you ever were feeling and not saying, and the things that you said. And that
Yeah.
just makes your job as an actor so much easier because you can just be in
Yeah,
that room
it's
and
true.
whatever
It
comes,
was-
comes.
I never put this together, but Anthony, that kid, and that little detail about, his parents need him to stay busy, which tells you a whole world about who that kid is. I never put together that Anthony is Hayden and Evan, that he's a kid
Yeah.
that's struggling.
Yeah.
And he has found a place, the church, where he can be occupied. Appreciated. But the whole resonance of starting the movie and ending with that kid just being present, given what our kids went through. You did that on purpose, Fran.
Did you read the script, Reed? You actually read the thing.
I only saw it at the movies that one time.
Well, the very beginning of the film, when you first see Anthony, he's framed through the little kitchen. And, the movie in many ways is about young men. And we that composition was very purposeful in saying, here's the kid in the picture, basically.
Oh my God, I'm getting chills. That's
Sort of
amazing.
that's what our story's about. So yeah, no, but look, I appreciate all these nice words about the script, but the reality is I worked with this director, Richard Nelson, who told us early in the rehearsal process, he's a writer director, and I did a play with him at the Public Theater in New York. And he said, look, whatever's not working for you, tell me and I'll change it. And it was I didn't like that because I thought, that's my job. Let me figure it out. Don't just change it. But I reflect on that process. And Richard was someone I gave this script to a lot and asked for notes from him. And when I got into the rehearsal, this idea that the more you can ask of the actor, the more you will understand your play, the better you will understand your story. That's something I really got from him. And that's something I tried to do with these actors. And using Martha as an example, that day, that incredibly emotional day, she tells a story. She speaks to the other parents. It's without sort of spoiling the movie. It's a very emotional scene. Martha asked me in our short rehearsal, why is it so hard to forgive? These people are tragic. They clearly aren't responsible. Why should it be so hard to forgive them? And it was listening to her and her instinct and her sort of, sitting with this and what was troubling her about the dialogue. We were able to sort of unearth and kind of find new language for her that spoke more to that the forgiveness isn't necessarily even.
No, don't spoil it, Fran. It's one of your most beautiful lines. Don't say it.
Okay. But these are things that developed in speaking to the actors. Do you know what I mean? And the script was obviously in a good place to get these people on board and get this movie made. But these final touches that made all the difference. And I think, the idea that it was effortless for Martha and that she did that all day and it felt sort of superhuman. It's also, she had some ownership of it because she's such a smart, all of these actors are so smart. And it was my job to listen to their instincts and make the changes necessary to get them on that path, because they all.
Along those lines, I thought everybody was present throughout
Yeah.
and stayed in the moment at the table. That's how each of us got through our stories, our grief, is to look across the room, and there were those human beings. It was never about acting. I don't remember a shred of other experiences. I looked and believed everything. And so all of us, even if we were just listening, there was never the instinct to step away from the experience in any way.
Yeah.
I think as well, and forgive me if I sound pretentious here, and I've said this before, and so my fellows here might be super bored about this, about hearing it, but to Fran's credit, I think, I've said it before, it's like a piece of music, and you get this piece of music and, you have to play it, and you just play it. You play it all day, or you play it half a day, or whatever it is. You interpret it as the musician, you give it your own flair or your own spin or your own truth. But I think, that's something that's so rare for actors to be given.
Mm-hmm.
So rare for actors to be trusted with that. And I think it's part of the reason we're all so in love with Fran, but also so incredibly grateful and so moved by this movie. And so we're all so proud of it, because it's such a rare experience to be handed something like this by your director, your writer-director, and to have them say, here you go.
Yeah.
And be trusted to do it. It's such an incredibly extraordinary and powerful thing for an actor, and it's happened so rarely.
Yeah.
Would you say, I know, speaking of casting, which I'm not sick of that story, Martha, by the way, but just this notion of, I honestly never experienced the intensity of a human being I didn't know before we began this, the extraordinary presence of these characters. Yes, the actors for sure, and I know we all approach it differently, and Jason, you'll be correcting me in a minute there, but I was just stunned by the presence, forgive me, I shouldn't say, of Linda. I just like, whoa, where did this come from? Well, that was to me the power of the experience. I just never experienced anything like it in my life.
Yeah.
That's really cool to hear. This is all so fascinating. Thank you so much for providing these little insights into each of your processes, which, as you say, are different, but there's overlap. I want to ask, in general, you've all touched on backstory and this idea that the script has these clues, but for any role, even if you're playing a real person, you have to invent backstory. And I think in particular, when you're playing a married couple, don't you have to agree on backstory that the two of you can't contradict each other? I want to.
You're not married, obviously.
Not.
Maybe not.
If you were married, you would know that when you had a discussion about something that you were utterly convinced you were both agreed on, that is never the case.
That's a
there
great
is
point.
agreement.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's about how much you can't communicate as much as you can. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Different
misremember.
versions of the same event.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, so maybe this is a question for Fran, but also for the four actors. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a work of fiction, but based on real events. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, as I know we all know, just a couple of days ago, we learned of yet another school shooting at the Oxford High School in Detroit. December 14th, I've written it here. December 14th will mark the 9th anniversary of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. How do each of you respond or incorporate real life stories into your creative process? Not just for this, but for any project.
I'm going to go first because I'm English, and it's a slightly different thing culturally for me. For me, this is a film about, it sounds like a non sequitur, it isn't. I was very, very taken by the story of I listened to recently, but they're stories I was familiar with before we made the film. There was a man who does extraordinary work in his community. He's an ex-prisoner. When he went to prison, it was for breaking into somebody's house, and he was caught by the couple, and he killed the old man whose house it was. And the old man's wife, the lady of the house, came to court when he was being sentenced, made a victim statement, and she said, "I love you, and I forgive you, and I wish you the best in life." And that changed his life, and I'm sure it changed hers too. And for me, this film is not about and not in any way piggybacking on the terrible tragedies that keep happening. It's about the need for forgiveness, and you don't need, for viewers or for anybody engaging with it, everybody can understands what it is to carry resentment, carry poison, carry hatred, or have blame forced on you by unscrupulous politicians, immoral politicians, and the power, the almost spiritual, almost divine power of forgiving for the person who forgives is what the film is about. So these real life incidents continue to be to appall all of us, but they don't really affect what this film is about. To my mind, it's about how you can help yourself and help the world by forgiving.
The thing about real life events and all of those things, I suppose it comes together for all of us differently. But regardless of the homework one does or what one connects to, when you're in the room, it's going to unfold the way it is going to unfold because you're with human beings. And with these actors, you never gave a thought to anything except what was happening in the room at that moment.
Right.
And that's what was extraordinary about it for me.
No, we certainly didn't. I mean, personally, I didn't do any sort of research. I didn't do any reading about, this subject. And I considered it, I thought about it. I think we all did, thought about maybe talking to parents or whatever. We toyed with that sort of concept, but, and each of us had our own way into that concept, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't feel that it would add anything personally for me to understanding this woman. In fact, I thought maybe in a way it might alienate me to try and approximate a real person's experience. Gail was enough, in other words. The story of Gail and Jay was enough, and the story of Linda and Richard was enough for me. I think, it again, everyone's different, but I just didn't want to have that kind of specter hanging over me, if that's not rude to say. Not that I have enormous respect for these people. And so I just didn't want to go there, if that makes any sense.
I read Adam Lanza's father's piece from the New Yorker about being the father of a serial killer. But honestly, everything I needed was in Fran's script. So it wasn't like I needed to. And, just being alive and hearing these stories, it just becomes part of your DNA. So moving forward, any big event that happens, landing on the moon or whatever, it just becomes part of who we are. Yeah. So it doesn't need dedicated research, I don't think, per se.
I mean, that's what we do, isn't it? As actors, we imagine things, and our children and our life and our history and what's brought us to that room is documented so beautifully in the script, the offstage moments too. We had to imagine that specific child. I was married to Martha. I wasn't married to another person. I had my relationship with my son. And the best way we can honor the real life events is by bringing as much authenticity and hope and the mission that we have going in the room to the story. And
I also thought that to talk to a real life parent would somehow feel weirdly trivializing. We're making a movie and I want to know what you felt. It's like, whoa, it's awful.
Such an invasion of.
Yeah.
The thing about this latest one, there's so many heartbreaking parts of it, but the kid was asking for help and he put it in writing.
And the parents refused to do it.
I mean, what in our story, the desperate wish. I mean, for us, Reed, you what did I miss? What did I miss? How could I have? I don't know. That's a non sequitur, and I apologize for it. But that just breaks my heart.
Because it speaks to what each of your job is and isn't as an actor. And yes, imagination and the overlap between your lives and these characters' lives, all of that is part of it. But I think it's a great point that it's not necessarily your job to interview someone who's actually been in this position and use that. If anything,
where it's useful, I'm sorry, I disagree. Where it's useful,
and
can help you bring more something truthful, authentic to the screen about this, incredibly, it will never not be a relevant subject, not school shootings, but the need to forgive, the need to live your life without poison, hatred. That will never not be relevant. And where it's useful, I absolutely think it's perfectly fine.
I played Lee Harvey Oswald once in a play,
Right.
and I read the Warren Report, and I went to Dallas and I met people. That was fun and essential because I was doing this guy. But
this is a serious film. If you go and interview someone because you're making, and your film is serious, but if you're making something which is a piece of genre entertainment, then it's not appropriate. Right. I think it's entirely appropriate to go and talk to people when you're making a serious film.
But remember Fran and I had the privilege of meeting a woman who lost her daughter at Sandy Hook. I couldn't get a word out for the sobbing. Fran was very moved. I'm not kidding. It's like, what?
I'm sure.
I can't imagine going into that private place of a human being who had gone through it.
But did she not tell you that she had forgiven? She'd found a way to forgive and move on with her life.
She had found her way through and had done so. Her marriage did not survive because her husband could not make that step. She's very open. I guess what I'm speaking to is the intense privacy of the process of coming to know a character in these circumstances. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Had the woman seen the movie, Annie? Had she seen the movie?
Franny, had she, hon? Yes.
Twice, yeah.
Yeah, twice, of course.
Okay, and she felt like we got close.
She said the second time she had her pen out to take notes and nothing came out.
Wow. People in Washington who felt the same thing, and there were the ones who had felt the almost, I'm embarrassed to say spiritual divine, it makes it sound like a religious film, but they had felt the power that forgiveness and the release that forgiveness had given them in their life, and they were thrilled that we were documenting it because it felt like it was something that should be carried.
Yeah.
Fran has also spoken about the spiritual sort of element or the influence of a sense of spirituality before. And I think it's a very important part of this film. I don't know, Fran.
Yeah. I mean, look, I sort of I play a different part in all of this. So research was important to me. I didn't speak to very many people before the film was done. A couple mothers and moms demand action in every town. I spoke with some journalists. I was lucky to get in touch with the authors of books that I wrote, right? But I do not some of the most meaningful things happened in more just casual conversation or informal with people who've just lost loved ones. And it wasn't necessarily these unspeakable, sort of unimaginable tragedies. It was, someone lost her brother, and she just told me, my family just wants to tell stories about him. Like, that's the most important thing for us, is that we can share stories with people. And it's a sort of more simple sort of detail and background like that kind of made me understand what should be structurally significant in this conversation and in this, the sort of the thrust of it all, the momentum of it all, where catharsis might come about, But I had a lot of insecurity and concern about how it was going to be received. This one woman, she really appreciated the film, and for the most part, it almost seems entirely to resonate with people. But the spiritual element, I think, is where, obviously this is sort of this Frankenstein's monster of these different events, right? And there's little bits of many of them in my fictional one, right? And what happened this week gets to be surreal because you sort of can see little pieces from so many different ones in each of these, And I think where it sort of departs also in our story is this sort of spiritual, this sort of spiritual atmosphere about the film. And for me, these characters are trying to make sense of what might be unexplainable. They're trying to make sense of this kind of mystery and find meaning in something. And to me, that's kind of a spiritual pursuit. There's a spirituality to their journey into the sort of the plot and the action of the film. And each of these four characters seems to have a different relationship with faith. And I'm not a religious person, but it was so important to me that there was a context to the film that was religious or spiritual. So that's why it's in a church. But my hope is that an audience member can walk away and sort of think about their own relationship with faith or spirituality. It's not about Christianity or sort of organized religion, but you ask yourself about your own feelings around meaning in life and sort of the mystery of things, because it ultimately is about life and death. And so I would like to think that's where the story departs and sort of transcends the plot, and what brought them all there. And then it's a general sort of search and meditation on these kind of themes in life. I know I hate to ramble, but this line was so important to me in Desmond Tutu's book about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, No Future Without Forgiveness. He said, forgiveness, reconciliation, and reparation are not the normal currency of political discourse. They're far more at home in a religious realm. And it's just a beautiful, I hate to say maybe a little cynical, but a beautiful thought. And for me it grabbed onto me, and I knew, and this has to take place in some kind of house of worship, that something will be lost if it's in a home or a community center, that it's important to have this hanging over it, so to speak.
Right.
Absolutely. And I very much see that in the film. I see so much of what you've all spoken about today is evident in this extraordinary film. Thank you so much for shedding more light on it. This has been so amazing.
Thank you.
I have to say, on behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, thank you all so much for joining us and sharing your experiences, your process, your craft with your fellow performers. And everyone go see Mass. And thank you guys for joining us.